Hello, everyone. This is Yu Tsai. Welcome to Let's Talk. And this week is so exciting for me because I'm talking to my peers, beautiful, amazing female photographers around the world, and showing us how they're keeping resilient through this time and continue to inspire others to continue shooting. And we're going to talk about the history, how they got into the industry, how they break through a male-dominated field. And today, my guest is iconic, one of my most loved photographers that I've followed for many, many years. It's Anne Menke. Hello.
Thank you. Hi. Hello,
Well,
everybody.
thank you so much for being with me. I know you are calling in from Mexico.
Yes, I'm here, and it's really hot and beautiful.
What are you doing down there, by the way? Is this your vacation home or is this where you live now?
No, I mean, I live here, and I live, a little bit everywhere because I'm always traveling. But we came here like 20 years ago, fell in love with it, and like I surf, and my family surfs, and we love living by the beach, and so we spend a lot of time here. But I actually
Well,
came. I was a month in New York in the quarantine, got the experience of it, and then after a 2 month trip to Africa, so it was kind of like an interesting experience coming from a trip to the city where nothing's happening anymore. And then I came back here. I actually did a shoot for Cynthia Raleigh. She asked me to
wow.
take some bikini pictures, which on the beach was perfect. So I came back here to do that.
Well, I can hear the ocean in your background. It sounds
I know
beautiful and
it's loud.
it sounds so relaxing. I wish I was there with you, but I'm glad I can be with you digitally. Well, this week, as you know, we've been focusing on talking to different photographers from different generations and from different fields. We have fashion photographers, celebrity photographers, and also I'm talking to a wildlife photographer for National Geographic at the end of this week.
Yeah.
So I'm so excited to have you with us today. And I'm not sure you know this, but I've been following your work for many, many years. My background wasn't actually in photography, it was in advertising. And your book had come across my desk many, many times when I was the creative director for our Now Group. We love your work. We love how you celebrate the subject that you photograph. So I want to talk about that a little bit. How did you get into the industry in the very first place?
I have a crazy story. I lived in a tiny town in Germany, and there was a little bit of fashion in my life. My grandmother was a hat maker, and my mom kind of like had a boutique at a certain point, and kind of like, so it was a little bit. My mom always made our clothes, and they were very like eccentric, a little bit like different to the, because I'm from a tiny, tiny town in the middle of nowhere. So it was kind of like from the beginning of my life, always with a little bit of like fashion in my life. And I was kind of like 10 years old, and I took pictures of on my dad's camera, like one of those little throwaway cameras. And then I was like, I want to take more pictures. And my dad's like, yeah, but the film is expensive. You can't take like pictures. Anyway, by like the age of 12, I was like, I want to be a photographer. And
Wow.
I was doing ballet really extensively and was dancing, and I wanted to be a ballerina and a photographer. And then my dad kind of was like, I think maybe photography is the real job. I don't know. Like tuning me that direction. I don't know if that really was the end of like the, but so I kind of took pictures. One of the first pictures I took, it was always black and white, and took my dad's camera, and I started getting. I had a little lab that I got and started developing my film, and then the first pictures were nudes of my girlfriends, and I
Wow,
thought,
you were very daring at a very early time.
I was like, that I thought was art, so I did that. And then, then I went to boarding school with 14. With 16, I stayed in that little town. Again, it was another little German town where I lived. And I decided to do an apprenticeship instead of studying. So I actually did an apprenticeship in a wedding studio with a wedding photographer. So
Wow.
I did my dues there, cooked the coffee, developed the film, sold passport pictures, like really, really basic stuff. And then I said one day, I think I saw a German Vogue lying on a table there, and I said, "That's what I want to do. I want to work for Vogue." And I was like
Wow.
19, and I said, "That's what I'm going to do." So with 19, I finished my apprenticeship, and then assisted in Germany, in Düsseldorf. I went actually to Düsseldorf, started there, and then like a year of assisting, started doing tests, and then like with 20, I kind of like got a little bit my portfolio together, and then I started just went to an agency and showed my work and got a job. Yeah, so my first job I
It's
got
so interesting to. I'm sorry, you cut out. What was your first job?
when I was 21. I was shooting for CNA, German catalog.
But it's very interesting, Anna, when I talk to people about the first magazine they looked at or what inspired them to be photographers, and it's fascinating to me because you looked at German Vogue, you picked a magazine at a highest elite in the publication world, and you already know that's the quality of work that you want to shoot. Because it's not like that for everyone. Some people are inspired by maybe more commercial magazine, other inspired by maybe like 17. It's
all my colleagues at the time, there was like 3 or 4 other people working there, and they all rolled their eyes and were like, yeah, okay, whatever. And I was like, that's what I'm going to do. And they, didn't believe me, but then, made my way.
But it's just because when I first got started in photography, it was actually the request of clients when I was working as a creative director. They would say, why are you having other photographers shoot it if you're writing the brief, if you're doing the swipes, why don't you just shoot? And eventually I did, but I didn't get behind the camera immediately as a photographer. I directed more TV commercials back then. I was directing a lot of TV commercials for Samsung, for different brands. Not a lot of it's in the fashion. In fact, none of it was in fashion, and it was all in consumer brands. So when my exposure to photography, it wasn't so much in the Vogue world. It wasn't so much in the Harper's Bazaar world. In fact, I didn't have that gauge personally, like which one is a better publication. What I knew was that whatever I shoot, have to be able to sell. And I know when I first broke into the business, that became the word commercial, which then people started categorizing my work as commercial. It doesn't fall into editorial. And it's a very funny place to be.
No, but it's also, I do think that people get categorized. Like I shot, for example, I was inspired, like, besides that I wanted to shoot fashion, my original inspiration was more reportage photographers from 1900, like, Eisenstadt,
Oh,
Cartier-Bresson, like all the old photographers. That was kind of reportage was like where I was really inspired from. And I think that's what I was always like trying to achieve in fashion and as well. And another thing, I was a little kid, I always wanted to travel. That was one of my biggest dreams. I would go to my dad and be like, why are we traveling to Italy? Why don't we fly to China? And he was like, no, we're not doing that. We're driving to Italy or to Spain. I was like, yeah. I thought it was really annoying because I wanted to go in the far world and see everything. So that was one of the things that I always tried to do with my work too, is like going and travel, and do, discoveries and stuff like that.
well, we get to see that in the body of work. We definitely see the journey and the travel from different journeys you've done through Africa, to every continent. You've been everywhere, and through your work that we get to live with, and we can live vicariously through you. And and now in Mexico too. I just got some personal photos of you, what you just shot on your phone, showing me the location where you're at. I was like, wow, there's another story for Elle magazine in the making, because it's so beautiful. And that's one thing about your work that I've always admired, even if I was a photographer, that your work is felt so effortlessly translated into both editorial and commercial. And that's a fine line and a beautiful line to have, because it makes you such an incredible versatile photographer to work with. I remember you shooting anywhere from beauty to clothing to fashion. But when you first started, did you ever question, hi, um, did you ever question whether or not that you were going to be in a very competitive field? Did you ever question that being a woman, how you're going to break through this crazy crowded dominated field?
I think it was. I think it's very interesting to talk about it because it was so different when I started. So I'm 53 and I started with 21 shooting like jobs, right? So it's 32 years. It's a really extremely long time ago, and I think it was such a different
Icon. Yes.
No,
Let me bow to the icon.
Funny, it's like, look, when I was 19, like the pictures I looked at, I was looking at Peter Lenkberg, I was looking at Avedon, I looked at all these photographers, I looked at Arthur Elgert, and they obviously, they're like, 15 years older than me or whatever, and they had already started their career. Ellen von Unwerth, everybody was already like, that's the people that I looked at, that I thought, I want to be like them. So then you start, obviously, first you start your idols, you try to copy, and then you try to find within that your own world, which over time you do. It takes you a little bit. You shoot something, you're like, that's not me, and then you're like, ooh, this is actually a little bit of me, and that's how with time it comes. And I think at that time, I can't really remember if it was so hard as a woman. it was probably, but I maybe didn't recognize it that much because I just focused on what I wanted to do. I always said that's what I want to do, and I worked really hard, and I did it. You know, I moved from Germany to Paris, and I remember like my first year in Paris was like driving back and forth because I had maybe a German client that would pay for something, and then back to Paris to do an editorial. Like it was just like, you know, like working your way up and like just do what you do. There were moments, there's definitely a few times that I know that a specific job came along where a client said, okay, we want to book Anne Menke for this job. And then there was a model that said, sorry, it needs to be shot by a man. Because I heard once that this particular model said that only a man can shoot or sexy. And I was like, oh, all right, really? Maybe different.
Wow.
So that was so I had a few little things happening to me like that I definitely thought like, oh, okay, so maybe it's not good to be a woman in this business. But on the other side, I think it never really stopped me. I don't think I thought too much about it.
Well, that's interesting because I know when as an advertising creative at the time, when we called in books to look at, we definitely categorize people as we call the books, and we call the agent and say, send us lifestyle photographer who travel, and we want a female photographer, or we did not look at work as a creative director, a body of work based on photographers. We did look at work based on men's perspective versus women's perspective and trying to find what matches the client's vision, what that may be.
Yeah.
And I did find it as in that field at that time, I did see ourselves always looking at, oh, beauty studies, those are great for women photographer to do. Oh, adventures, going outside, more rigorous and require more footwork, we're gonna hire a dude to do it. And that was our lack of education, right? That was the time. I'm talking about 25, 30 years ago. Oh my God, I'm dating myself. When I was in the advertising world, but that was very prevalent. And then I think what happened in about 20 years ago, when photographer became stars, they actually become mega stars. Like the new Testino started rising, and then the Peter Limber's always been there. The Herberts rise to the place of where they begin to dictate. And you were among the pack of those photographers, the women photographers I admire so much. I watched and looked at you climb and competing against men photographers. You might not have felt that you were in competition with them, but from an art director and creative director's perspective, you were among sharks.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you know, at my time when I started, it's like, you know, I mean, I think who's the same age as me is Pamela Hansen that I love. I mean,
Yes.
there's a few.
Melanie McDaniel.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's a few women, we're like the same age, we started the same time, we did kind of like the same thing. And I do think, but we all, I think, had a successful career with enough jobs. And I really think that in the end, it's like what you said, is like you were looking for something what matches. And I think that is a thing from that time that was really specific, that every photographer had their style. And I do think you picked a photographer for their style, not for if they were cool or if they were, you know, it had nothing to do with the outside world because there was no social media. It was about
that's right.
that you could tell with the pictures that you take. And I think that's the one big thing difference today. That, I mean, I get hired sometimes today for a job where I don't know the hair and makeup, I don't know the stylist. Before I would always put the team together, and it's this new world where that doesn't exist anymore. So I do think that that's just a very different time for that.
And I agree. I think at that time, style was so very important too, because when we call it a lifestyle photographer's book, we expect a certain things, or travel photographer or portrait photographer, whatever the title and the category. And I see that within the last 20 years and maybe last 10 years, stylistic work was not as necessary, rather than your personal marketing ability became very, very important. Versatility of your work became very important because I when I switched over from photography to when I switched over from advertising to photography, I had the learning of 10 years, 20 years of watching you guys work and say, well, how would I survive in this pool of sharks? Because I started later in the industry. You know, people my age at the time will already have a successful career, and I'm competing against people who I used to call their books in, you know? And so it was a very interesting point. And at that time, something really huge happened that was film to digital. And a lot of photographers didn't catch on right away. And I was fortunate enough, and I always count my blessing that I came into the industry at the right time, at the right moment, where I happened to be teaching Photoshop at Art Center Pasadena. I happened to be very technically savvy in the digital world. And it put me
And
right in the market of digital photography. And I don't think my career would be where it is today if I didn't enter the market at the time with the knowledge I happened to have from a different field. And when you had to transition from film to digital, were you resistant?
I was very resistant. It was very difficult. I call myself still today a porcelain old fashioned. It's terrible. It's like, when was it? Like 15 years ago, I think, right?
15 years, exactly. 17 years ago, to be exact, that's when I entered.
I have a funny story. I was on a shoot in Paris. It was so I was always like, no, I'm shooting Pentax 6.7, that's what I shoot. And that's it, right? So there was nothing that I would do different. And that's, because I'm creating a story, I don't want to do technical things. So then I got this job. It was Macy's in Paris, my first digital shoot. I got the camera and I do what I always did. I, put a 2.8 on a, I don't know, 125, and I walk backwards and I give the card to the digital tech, and I've never done it before. I think I didn't even check. I didn't know I had to. And everything was out of focus. And he was like, listen, there's nothing in focus. It's all blurred. I was like, what? I was like, how can it be? I was in a total shock. And so this was the first learning curve, the technical part. Then cameras obviously got so much better over the last years. So now it's a little bit easier when it comes to that. But it took me a very long time to find my own style again. Like
Wow.
I'd say a long time, but it took me a while. How can I shoot on a little format, and find the same grain, find the same depth of fields, find the same look? Like, how can I get the closest to the colors or anything that I would normally do, So then I think this took like maybe 2 years or something. And then, working through camera systems and trying it out, and then now I do it with my eyes closed, the same as before, but it's it was an interesting time, I think.
But did you find during that time that because the technology changed, your subject matter also changed with you, that you weren't able to capture them the way you used to do?
I think what automatically maybe happened to everybody, I don't know. I shot on a Pentax very fast, and I'm very spontaneous, and I don't stop shooting. I shoot a lot. Sometimes I would do one roll of film because it's portraity, but then if I do something running, I shoot 10 rolls. And I think now it can happen to me that I shoot 700 pictures, and I'm like, why did I shoot 700 pictures? Because I can. So it's a little bit strange. So I think the dynamic changed. But the thing that happened in digital that's amazing, you can suddenly capture certain moments that were maybe lost before because you weren't fast enough. That's one thing. I do think there's beautiful accidents, but then also a lot of beautiful accidents that happen because of film are not happening anymore.
I agree.
And more perfect, so it's interesting. What happened to me that I think is really interesting, my retoucher and printer in New York, I still work with LTI, and Jeffrey Kane there. He's with me for I think we know each other for 25 years when I came to New York, or 26 years. And I picked him to be my retoucher, or his company to be the retouching. And then that is, I think, the most beautiful thing, that they really understand my pictures. So when they retouch my digital photography, it looks like mine and not like cleaned up or whatever somebody else.
It's not a one filter click. It is actually a technique that makes your work feel like your work. And I think that's important to talk about, because that was what's happening at the time, because I was a tester for Photoshop, and I was testing filters, and I actually know the creator who created the healing brush, and is a friend of mine, and so I know him really well. During that time, I was testing those filters on how to improve Photoshop. And what was happening is that everybody was looking for a solution for one click for everyone, a single click solution for retouching for everyone. And that was something that I keep saying to the programmers. It is not simply fractions and light and just adding a texture. Each photographer do come from a different perspective. The film grain they choose, the exposure they choose, that really changes the dynamic of the photo. Those things need to be considered. Now, over time, they have, and you're right, finding a retoucher that actually can marry with your work without feeling like it's retouch is so, so important. I know, I go back and look at my early work. Whoa, I don't know what I was doing with that heavy brush of retouching. But at the time, it's what people expected you to do, and no blemish is allowed. A little bird that's flying, you didn't plant that bird, you retouch it out, right? So like you
That's
said,
the thing
just
actually about the new world now. Now a lot of times there's no more retouching. You know what I mean? I've done so many campaigns recently or shoots where there's no retouching, which I think is a beautiful thing.
and it's coming back, and the new generations of Instagram photographers, and now the new birth of the new generation of photographers, the millennials and the beyond the millennials, they are loving film more and more. They're definitely making it more popular again, and we're going to be talking to some of those kind of photographers later this week. But I do embrace it. I do love seeing it. However, I do have I have a pet peeve though. Just because it's film, it doesn't mean it should be out of focus. I do have that problem.
That is
Because that's an excuse people use. Oh, it's shaky. Yeah, because it's film. No, it's because you didn't have the right exposure, right shutter speed, and hold the camera and hold your breath like we used to have to do, right? Remember back in the days before you click, you hold your breath so it
It's a
doesn't move.
thing that I do with young photographers that I meet or assistants that I meet that want to talk to me or that I hire. I always try and tell them that they need to try and learn the basics, and the basics
Mm,
start with a simple camera and develop your own film, and just that you understand where it comes from. If you've never done it, I don't actually think that you understand photography, because there is a little bit like I can't say it's easy. There's so many beautiful things that came out of digital photography because we can do so many things and we can have a fast result. And there's a lot of amazing things about it, I think. But I do think it's beautiful if you kind of understand the basics.
and it gives you more of a tool. You actually have flexibility, because I know there was a period of time that I had a client that said to me, I really want to look like we shot on film, but we don't want to pay for the film. We want you to shoot digital. Can you convert it back to film? So we did the reverse. We shot the entire campaign in digital, pick out the selects that we wanted, burn it back onto film, and
Yeah,
print it for film, and then you scan it back in and put it to the magazine. It's like just
exactly.
but
Yeah,
something happens in that process is that your work becomes less precious, and you're not looking at the pixels any longer. You're looking at the subject matter. You're looking beyond the technical, and I think that if that's what I'm loving about the evolutional change that's happening organically. That some people are shooting film, some people are shooting digital, and somewhere in between there's gonna be a nice collection of crossovers that create this nice synergy again. And it's a pendulum. It keeps on swinging with technology versus art, or art versus technology. But the process of printing is not going to change anymore. Digital printing is going to be what the magazine publications do. And as we know, we are also evolving to a point that we might not even have publications in the future. This is the truth, and this is the evolution process. And during this time, I'm sure you've been seeing on Instagram photographers shooting to the computer screen on a Zoom call or FaceTime call as the actual photography for cover of magazines. I I I, I don't know how do you feel about that?
I don't know. It's like, no, I really think actually the more I think about it is like, look, anything is possible now, and if that's possible, it's beautiful. It's whatever needs to do what people need to do for themselves also to make them happy. I think I realized a lot over the recent years too that I just really know what I love about photography, that I will
Mm,
always be a photographer and that I will never stop taking pictures. But there's a lot of commercial aspects that have changed so much in our work, because like you said before, we were hired for a campaign and we were involved in all the ideas, and everything that came from you personally. And that really is less and less today, which is just like another aspect. Like, is it still as interesting, to do fashion photography as before? And like I said, I always traveled, I always did a lot of reportage photography, and I tried always to do my fashion in that way, that it's kind of a storytelling reportage. And that's the one thing that I realized, as long as I can shoot stuff like that and have editorials or anything that's an output like this, it doesn't matter if that's a book, an exhibition, an idea, something that comes across that interests me, that is actually what will keep me alive as a photographer. But it's a very personal thing. And I think if you grow up in a different time, like I have an assistant right now, she's really young, I'm 22. And sometimes with me on a job and discuss this. And then I work with a hairdresser that's my age that says, "Oh, do you remember?" And she's like listening because it's a really rare occasion that we're back in a situation like this on a commercial job. And it's like these things that kind of like come back. Like we did a shoot for Vogue Holland with a dear friend of mine that's an editor I worked with for 25 years, Martin Mellema. We went to Spain. And like Casey, my assistant, was like, this is so beautiful. We can just create, and with an amazing stylist and amazing hair and makeup. And I was like, yeah, but that's why I always did that, because I love it.
But do you find, okay, you've been doing this for 30 years. And I know, and we all know as photographers out there who are listening, that we have, that your career can come in and go out and so fast. And there are dry spells and there are moments that you feel like, oh my gosh, nobody loves my work. Did you have to go through that?
So that's one interesting, I'm trying to think when that was. Do you remember the time where everybody flashed on location?
Oh, yes. I was one of them.
I'm Miss Daylight Queen, okay? I can only do daylight. I mean,
I don't do that anymore.
I know how to set lights, but my favorite thing is daylight, and I think that's what I'm good at. And it's really funny. I remember when this scene happened, and there was even Michael Jansson that actually shot Always Daylight would shoot flash on location, and I was like, what is going on? Why is everybody changing their style? And I insisted that I'm not changing my style. And it was in that time, and it's probably, this is a long time ago. It's 18 years ago, 15 years ago. No, it's longer.
Right when I started. I remember it's right when I started because that's when I was learning what's popular.
I was changing agents, and I made the round through New York, and I showed my book, and I saw all these different agents that I wanted to see. And I would say from 20 people, let's say I saw 15 people. 13 people said to me, sorry, you need to start shooting flash on location. And I was like, I can't do that. I can't do it. It's not what I like. I would hate the picture. It's not what I do. It's just not my sensitivity. I can't do it. And they were like, sorry, then, you're never going to get any further. I'm like, okay.
Wow.
Then I met two agents that were interested, and they said, no, do what you do, because that's what you do best. And that's what I continued. And I went with this particular agent. Actually, you were with him. We talked about this.
Yes.
And it was an interesting thing. I never changed. I maybe had a little lull in that time, but I can't even remember if I really had a lull, because I kind of always worked quite a lot. And I just continued what I did, because this is one thing I realized when I'm on a job or on an editorial or whatever. If I take pictures that I don't like, I get kind of upset. I think I have.
Well, that's such a passion coming through. That's absolutely your passion coming through.
That's what I do, and I have to look at it and love it. And if I don't love it, I will always try and find somehow a way. Like, let's say I hate the location or something is wrong, I will try and find a way that I like it, and then I'm happy. Yeah. So,
well, for those of you guys are
having a hard time with that.
Well, for those of you guys just joining in the middle of a conversation about flash and daylight, a style that was very prevalent and popular about 15 years ago, and people still use that style when it's necessary, especially in entertainment television posters. And it technically is strobing while daylight's available, but it's not like the Annie Leibovitz of a kiss of a light to kind of pop a light. It's actually overtake the daylight, so it drops everything in the background by 2 stops. So if you don't know what that is, Google it, learn it. It's a technical thing. Have fun with it. But however, it was a very popular thing. It was very Joe Greenberg at the time. It was everyone, actually. It was every movie poster you saw. It was, and funny enough, you mentioned that we both joined the same agency. That agency no longer exists. However, at that time, you're absolutely right. They were really specific. Everybody was very specific in categorizing what kind of photography you would be. And at that time, agency only take photographers they don't have that style of already. So they're like, oh, we love you because you stay with your natural light, and we have somebody else already do that, so you don't compete against the same job. Which, again, we can't say that about today's agents. Today's agents will take as many people as they can. More is more, and more opportunity to try to get job for the agency. The art is gone in terms of crafting an agency.
That you say that, because we were speaking about this a lot. I've been now with my agent in New York. I've been with her in Paris for 28 years. It's like the longest relationship ever, and she's amazing. And it is so funny that when all these agencies had suddenly 30, 40 photographers, I was with one agent that had 40 people, and I got lost there. It didn't feel right to me, and I feel really, really good that I'm with her, and she has just like always, 12 people or something, and it feels just really personal. And that's just how I like working. I like working with people directly that I love, and like I could not be like in this big pool for some reason. That's like
Well,
strange.
and then when you were at the same agency as I, just for everybody out there, know that I was not actually a photographer at the agency. I was a director at the agency. I was doing TV commercials and directing. And because of your work and how much you travel, and my previous life as a wildlife biologist, so I love the traveling. I saw your pictures and I thought, wow, I want to be her. I want to be able to travel and take pictures instead of staying in the studios and just directing in a dark green, always in a green stage all the time, on a green screen stage all the time. And you were such an incredible inspiration to me. I want you to know that it was so beautiful to watch your journey at that agency. So I went to the agent, Bill, at the time, the owner, and asked him that if I could be a photographer. And he's like, "What do you mean?" I go, "Well, I would love to shoot. I'm directing, I'm behind a camera, I can do stills." And I bought in my portfolio I worked on for about, a few weeks because I didn't think it'd take very long to build a portfolio at the time. I took some pictures. I came in and he looked at my work and he said, "You'll never become a photographer. If you want to go down that path, we'll not only represent you as a photographer, we're going to drop you as a director." When he said that, I picked up my book. That book is gone anyways. I picked up my book proudly and said, "Watch me." And I left the agency and never direct for them again. And that was the push for me to say, you know what, I can do this. And I'm still here and the agency's gone, just for the record. Just for the record. But I have to pay so much respect to your work and say thank you, because you were such an inspiration to me at the time. And one thing that you mentioned just now, I think is really important to make a note of. You embrace natural light. And at that time, I was in New York a lot. I moved back to LA. And there was a stigma about living in Los Angeles that we could never become a photographer living in Los Angeles, at least not a real respectable one. But what happened was during that time, I had an opportunity to work on a music video with Herb Ritz. And I got to speak to him. It's before he passed, obviously. So it was about 15 years ago. And I asked him about photography, and he gave me one lesson I will always hold, and I tell my assistants this. And then that is, he said to me, "There's only one sun in this world, and there's one reason for it. You only need one sun in this world. Bounce it, hit it, find it. Don't lie against the sun. Don't fight it. One sun, one source, figure it out." And that changed my career. That's exactly what you just said. Embrace it.
It's an interesting thing because a lot of times when I'm in studio and I set one light and then everybody's like, "You don't have the light." I'm like, "Why would you need another light? The sun is also light." So there's so many ways of doing that. But then again, I do think, people have different styles and different aesthetics, and that's where it comes from too, and I respect that. And like I said, for me, the most important thing is like, if I like it, then it has passed at least my thing, you know what I mean? So,
But that's a confidence over the years. I think for me, I've been in this for 15, 16 years, including a testing years, is that there are days I still go, "Oh, I hate my style. I want to change it. I want to take the opportunity the next photo shoot and change it." But truthfully, I can be the first to admit, we don't change. Even though we think we're changing, we really don't change, because it's ingrained in our blood how we see the world and how we capture the world. I can never do what Anne Menke does. I can never do what Herb Ritz does, but I can definitely be inspired by it. I can definitely emulate as much as I can. But we all see the world from different perspective, about different history and different struggles, because they come through from our work.
We always, be inspired by things we see. It doesn't matter if you travel to a new place or if you open, like, it happens to me that I open a magazine, see a story and be like, "Wow, this is cool." And it gives me an inspiration to do something else. I do think there is always inspiration. I mean, it doesn't matter if that's, by travel, art, people, or other photographers. I think that's one I find the most amazing thing about Instagram. You can really get so much research done on Instagram that you before had to go to the National Picture Library, like some other, or to a magazine store, which it's a little bit sad that we don't make the, stops at the magazine store like we did 10 or 15 years ago. But
I lived at Strand's in New York, the Strand bookstore upstairs, third floor up, archive books. That's where I lived, and that's where I would, at the time, hide in a corner and take my phone, take picture with the phone and take. That was how we did research then. Now you swipe, and you find something you like, you pin it, you put it on the Pinterest, or you can put it in your favorites, and those are it. But one of the images that I don't know if you remember, but I have always loved, and it's still so dear to my heart. It's the image of Elisa Kant that you shot with flowers wrapping around her head, and she was like in Hawaii.
Yes.
It, that singular image, it was the inspiration for me when I shot Gigi Hadid for the Gets campaign.
Yeah.
It looks nothing like it, but she had a flower in Hawaii, because that was one swipe, that single swipe of that image. I said, wow, this captures all the exotic, this captures travel, this captures beauty, this, and I was looking at it from a creative director's mind. What image would capture a moment for a photography? And that picture to me today is still one of the most beautiful image ever captured. I love that picture so much.
Yeah, no, but it's like that's I think we always did that with everything. Like I remember that you would like rip out pages out of magazines. I had stacks of stuff that was my inspiration, or copies, because look, at that time there was no iPhone. It was a lot of either kept the tear sheets or you made copies from books, and that was kind of like you pin it on a wall or went through, or like there was always an inspiration book for that.
Do you ever sometimes
And we did Polaroids.
and
The
yes,
best thing ever.
I go through this a lot with my assistants, and I drive them crazy because I'll often take the picture and go, this looks too much like what I already done before. Am I sick of my own work? How do I make it so it's different? Do you go through that struggle? Because over 30 years, your work has been very consistent, has been very much about travel, has been very much about capturing moments of spontaneity. But have you ever gone through the period you go, I don't want to do this style anymore, and you want to try something different?
I do think you try to evolve, because like that's the whole thing. Like a lot of times I'm like, oh God, I've done this before, because you're coming back to certain things. I mean, there is I'm married for 25 years. My husband is like, oh, the classic back shot, somebody walking away, like you've done. And I was like,
That is so mean.
which is like, I do think, but I also think that just belongs to but I do think, yes, you always try and evolve. That's why you look at what other people do and be like, okay, that's what's happening now. You can be like interested in it and take a piece of it. Sometimes, I find it quite boring and not interesting what's in magazines, and then I'm not inspired by it. But when I see something that I like, and it could be in a magazine, it could be from a young photographer, an old photographer, honestly, inspiration, like I said before, I think it can come from everywhere, and it doesn't really matter. And I think it's really important. If you stop looking, it doesn't matter at what you look, you will not evolve. I think you evolve through looking at things, but it could be anything,
But with the experience you have, for me, I still often go through the stage when I flip over a magazine, for example, when the editor have changed, a magazine evolved into a different note. I still have that anxiety at times and go, wow, I don't belong in this publication anymore. I used to shoot for this magazine for 5, 6 years. Now the editor have changed hand, the vocabulary of the magazine have changed, and my work no longer feel like it belongs in there. And it makes me doubt my work. It still makes me go, wow, do I need to change with the magazine? How do I sustain relevance in this industry? How do you maintain that confidence and stay in this word relevant in the world of photography?
I don't know. I think that it's a difficult question. I don't know how you stay relevant. My personal opinion is you still have to be true to yourself. You have to. There's something that each of us do, that we do in our style, and if you change completely, it's not you anymore. So I think you have to stay relevant within yourself. Well, and I think a lot of times what I learned is that's again that sounds like so from the old times, but before we worked with specific stylists, and the stylist and the photographer worked super close together to create the story. And I did that for years for Japanese Vogue or for Spanish Vogue, and I worked with the same stylist. So we had like the same language together, and we got hired together to do what we do. And sometimes you get thrown in with somebody new, or like you said, an editor at a magazine changes, and they don't really know how you work, and it takes either a while to get together and stay like that. But things just change through the progress of new people coming in. And look, it's also the time for a new generation. That's the other thing too. I think there's a lot of amazing new photographers out there, and it's their time, to shine and do what they do.
Well, I think, like, for example, I'll give you an example specifically because I came into the industry at a very different time. Digital started being very prevalent, and I was one of few people who understood how to print. I went to Condé Nast to talk to them about how to convert film to print, and as some, from digital to film, film to print, and it was something that I was good at. But what happened was I happened to love commercial. What happened to embrace Victoria's Secret, Sports Illustrated, even iconic images from Ellen Worth for Claudia Schiffer, I guess. And those were my vocabulary. As I was shooting that for 10 years, it went from sensual to sexy, sexy to borderline porn back to sexy, sexy back to sensual. So there's a wave of this like type of imagery that I was known in an industry that you're going to hire Yu Tsai. It's going to be on a men's magazine cover. Doesn't matter who it is. It's going to show cleavage and maybe show a little bit of butt. But as the evolution started evolving, and now women photographers are the new vocabulary, new, and it should have been already a vocabulary in everybody's language, but it has because the Me Too movement has really switched the pendulum. And at that time, I honestly had that. I had a panic attack. I was like, oh my God, this is not what people think is sexy anymore. What I do is awesome from relevant to dead. There was no in between. And I had to reevaluate my work all over again. And my agent called me and said, you're not going to get calls for a while because people don't want sexy, not at least not the way you shoot sexy. So that is very scary for a photographer, you know?
No, but I also think my personal opinion is that the Me Too movement was necessary, and it's great that it happened. But I also think that it got taken way too far because there is nothing wrong about nudity. There's nothing wrong about sexy. There's nothing wrong about porn if that's what you want to do. I think it's everybody's opinion and style. Look, there were things that were abused, and definitely that's the bad part about it. But the photography and the style itself, I think, is actually terrible that got censored.
And I love you said that because
it takes a lot of freedom away for doing what you were doing.
I love that. The behavior deserve punishment, but the work, it's the I don't want to say the byproduct, but the finished work then come from the abuse, right? That's independent behaviors. And you're right. I hope the pendulum will swing back that we can celebrate art for art's sake and nudity and we'll be able to celebrate Helmut Newton's work without saying that that's actually objectifying women, because that's a fine line I'm finding every single day. I'm learning that as well. Having this week to talk to women photographers like you who are iconic and my inspiration is teaching me how to reevaluate my work. And I think you're right. It's so important that I can never lose myself and not be myself. So for me to shoot a woman and not shoot them in the way I think is powerful and sexy, it's not me. It truly isn't. But I am trying to find that line where we rely on publications, we rely on catalogs and advertising clients to say, okay, you haven't crossed the line and this is the work that we're looking for. And that's a scary part. 15, 16 years into this business, when it swung the other way, it was like fast.
Yeah. And I think that sexy is beautiful, and it's also terrible, the idea of thinking that everything should be shot by women photographers. I'm a kind of person, even when I put a team together, I'm very much into everything in moderation, every little bit of everybody. So I love to have half a men's, half a women's team. If I'm on an all women's team, I'm always like, why is it just women? It's like, and it's different. And I think, I love women, I love men, I love, both. And I think it would be terrible, to be like everything has to be woman just because that's the new time. I think that's just not how it's supposed to be. I think for me personally, I love when there's like a mix of people.
But I love the fact that this period of time that women photographers are being celebrated, not only celebrating the new generations, they're also respecting and coming back to the older generations and people like you who have never wavered from your style and your work ethic, and then you still, I hate to use the word, but truly remain relevant throughout all the pendulum swinging. And that's longevity in this business, and that's what I hope for. I hope that I have a longevity in this business and continue to get to do what I get to do through whatever hard time we may be going through Me Too, COVID, whatever the next iteration of drama we're going to go through in our life. But because it's truly is such a pleasure and such amazing privilege to be in this industry and be able to take photography and travel. And you and I both share a really dear client, Sports Illustrated. I remember looking at your work back in the days when you shot Sports Illustrated, how inspiring that was for me. And one of the main reasons I so desire to shoot for them and I get to now. And so I want to thank you so much. I mean, one part of this talk inviting you here is that we don't get the chance to say thank you to people who inspire us. And I wanted to give you, I want to do that. I really want you to know that how inspirational you were to me in my career and continuously. And as a woman, and that in your own right, so incredibly powerful with your work.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I will continue to follow your work and love your work and travel through your work. And at this time when we're all in a lockdown, when you guys want to feel like you want a little bit of escape, Anne Menke has the work for you to look at, and it really makes you go to different places in this world. And just imagine she's on the surfboard with the camera shooting, because that's how I feel when you're shooting. They are truly beautiful and treasure. And I hope one day that we get to be together and sit across from each other and share more journeys and more stories together. But I want to thank you. We will. And thank you so much for being here today. And one of the most important thing is that being part of this talk, you have contributed 500 masks because of that initiative of Let's Talk. We donate the masks to first responders. And with your today's donation, you put 1,500 masks, which total 2,000 masks to first responders. So thank you for your generous donation. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We're doing everything we can, little we can, compound together. Over the last 10 weeks that Let's Live has been going on, it's been 10 weeks, guys. We have raised over 100,000 masks today. So thank you for those out there who watch and support. And thank you, Anne Menke, for not just somebody who's an angel in donation, but being my true inspiration. And I love your work and I love your soul and how amazing for us to be able to reconnect.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will see you again soon. And meanwhile, stay strong and stay healthy. And I know I don't have to say this, stay having fun because you are already.